Hey y'all, it's me Tiffany and welcome back to my channel. So before I talk about this Ellen Hopkins book, I want to say there is going to be mention of child abuse and neglect. And of course there's going to be, this is a book about drugs. It's a sequel to Crank. So if any type of drug related stuff triggers you, this is a book about drugs and she does not shy away. And I'm not going to censor myself. But the child abuse is there and it's towards an infant. So if that's triggering, when I get to that section, I'm going to put like a little timer and like a stamp just for people who may have a harder time with that subject, but that maybe the drugs don't bother them. So I just wanted to put that as a disclaimer before I get into it. So I am going to talk about Glass by Ellen Hopkins. I talked about Crank recently. This is a second book in a trilogy. I've read this probably about 3 to 4 times. I've read Crank a little more. And I know in the last video I got a little more personal, and while I did talk about story and the way she wrote and stuff, I got more personal about like my connection to the book. There may be some of that in this as well, but I am planning on talking a little bit more about the book maybe than last time, but I do want to keep these brief. As background, if you have not seen my first video or you only care about this, I'm a huge Ellen Hopkins fan, and I want to have dedicated reviews for her books on this channel because I appreciate her. I love the book so much. I have not read her nonfiction, and I don't have interest in her nonfiction or textbooks she's written, but I'm just talking about her young adults, her adults, and now that she's starting to do middle grade. And the one I want to talk about today is Glass. Glass is another word for a type of crystal meth. Ice is another one. There's like a lot of terms to use, and it definitely talks about different types of like, there's different grades of meth. So Glass is a type. It's supposed to be a really good type of meth. I've personally never done meth. I've known people who's done meth, but Glass is supposed to be good. So that's where the name comes from. So I think this is a very worthy sequel to Crank, and I think this book is grittier. It is a harder read because, the way Crank ends, she gets clean because of her baby Hunter, and it looks like there's a chance for happiness at the end. This shatters it. This shatters it completely, especially with the way this book ends. You know that Christina Bree, because, she goes by both. Before she's on drugs and when she's sober, she goes by Christina because that's her legal name. Her persona, Bree, is the person she's created because of the monster. And this definitely is a harder read because her story is not going to end happy. Meth addiction or any drug addiction really is not a happy thing. Some people may have a success story about getting clean, but the way there is messy. And Ellen Hopkins' daughter has done drugs, and you can definitely tell she took the time to understand. And, just seeing from the outside, like knowing a loved one who does stuff, it's hard on you too. And then, she took the time to research and learn to get into the mind of an addict. And this is poetic in the way, and not just because of the prose, because like the first book, this is one reason why it's really quick to read, because it's written in verse. So I'm going to read a little passage before I get too much into the story. You know my story, don't you? All about my drive into the lair of the monster, drugs some call Crank. Crystal, Tina, Ice. How about a summer visit to my dad sent me into the arms of a boy, a hot-bodied hunk, my first love, who led me down the path to insanity. How I came home no longer Christina Georgia Snow, gifted high school junior, total dweeb, and perfect daughter, but instead a stranger who calls herself Bree. No matter how hard Christina fought her, Bree was stronger, brighter, better equipped to deal with the world where everything moved at light speed. Everyone mirrored an edge, where every day became another word for making love with the monster. While that's not exactly the first page, that's the second and third, I think that is a brilliant way to start off this book. So the story is kind of like a train wreck. And, of course, nobody's a cartoon villain or a cartoon addict, whatever, because, like, I don't want to call her a villain, but she definitely makes choices that makes her life harder. And she's the one who ultimately made the choice to try meth. But your brain chemistry changes so hard on these drugs. And like people who tend to be addicts have a little bit of a different brain chemistry anyways, but meth is highly addictive. So some of this stuff is out of her control, but some of it is, and that's what makes stories like this, I think, so hard to just not look away, even if they are train wrecks, even if they're hard to digest, because how much of it is she actually able to control and how much is she not? Because once you become an addict, almost every addict I've ever met say they always crave their addiction, right? Especially if they're around it. And once you kind of get into it, like, she got clean when she had Hunter, which is her son that she conceived in the first book that she had. But now that her I almost said her Hunter, but her son is about to be baptized, and she invites her dad down, like, from Reno, which he's not a good guy. He's kind of the one who got her into this mess. And it's causing family drama and stuff. Like, she's wanting to get back into meth. And if you truly don't want to change or get out of it, even if you get out of it for a little while, most people want to go back, because you have to want to change yourself, right, for these treatments to work. And or not even treatments, but, to stay clean. And even if you do temporarily, if you want to go back, it's really hard to fight that, right? Especially like if you have somebody who is an addict as well coming down and just kind of like influencing it. And then she still has friends, and she contacts those friends, and she meets a boy who's an easy connection to more meth, which he has glass. And she almost misses her son's like baptism. And like, I do have issues with that like Christina's mom and dad, like, I feel like they know that she's done drugs, they recognize the signs, and yeah, they end up kicking her out of the house and stuff because the way the decision she's making and what's happening because of her drug addiction, and they're just tired of it, which is totally understandable. I kind of feel like maybe they should have caught on sooner, but at the same time, I understand. Like, sometimes just the habit creeps up on you really fast, or you just want to be in denial that they would make this decision again, and I totally get it. So, like, my initial is like, why didn't they say something sooner? Because obviously the signs were there, but at the same time, I understand. So I'm not blaming the parents, and they're doing what's ultimately best for their grandchild, even though that might mean kicking their daughter out of the house, because even though some of the decisions you make on drugs is not fully in your control, it's ultimately your choice to do the drug, right? So she goes, lives with the boy, and she like juggles two boyfriends, and so she can get more meth, and she falls for the guy she's living with, which isn't her official boyfriend, and he has kids and stuff, and she watches those kids, and I don't think that's the best thing. And okay, so I'm going to talk about the child abuse here. I understand why this is in this book. She doesn't watch Hunter the way she should. Like, she may not physically just like beat him up and stuff, but this is abuse. This is a baby. And like she leaves him like stuck under a chair. She lets him bust his lip. She's not truly watching them because she's high, right? And it's hard to read. It's disturbing. And you may think, why is this necessary? But a lot of other people, especially like children of addicts, have similar stories. And I think it just shows that even though Christina Bree is so well intentioned and she thinks she has a grip on things, it shows that she does not. It shows that she does not. And it's disturbing. You know, the baby ends up being okay and going back to his grandmother, which is ultimately the best decision for the child. I think that had to be there because, you know, we realistically know that if a person's on heavy drugs, they probably shouldn't be having children and watching them. But this actually shows, you know, and even though this is YA, it shows some reality of that without it letting it get too far. And there's been a lot of children who's had really rough incidents due to these things. And fortunately, Christina Bree is aware enough to realize maybe she doesn't need to go down this path, which a lot of people know this, but a lot of people don't go through with it. But at least she loves her son enough to hand over to her mother, or Hunter's grandmother. And that's a story I think a lot of people don't tell, because you hear about foster care and like all this stuff. And like, while I'm not going to say like everybody should go to their grandparents, that is a side that does happen occasionally. And I think, you know, and that's one way that this book shows a little hope, because she's aware enough and the drug hasn't took over enough to just keep putting this child in danger. She finally realizes, hey, I need to do what's best for Hunter. But unfortunately, she's so hooked on drugs, she don't make the permanent decision to help herself completely or be the mother that Hunter needs. One thing I love about this book, you know, outside of what I just talked about, you know, it shows that she's just like doing whatever she can, especially like since she's basically has 24 access to drugs, and how it spirals out of control. Like, often you make bad choices, they do end up in jail. She does end up pregnant again because she's not thinking clearly, so she's making decisions that aren't ultimately in her best interest or her child's interest or children. She does like I don't feel like this is a huge spoiler since the third book's out and it's in the perspective of 4 kids, but this talks about the pregnancy right at the end as a cliffhanger of her second child. And as I mentioned in the last one, and I've mentioned here, like, you can't really have a super clean and happy thing when it comes to about drugs, even if it is a person's story about becoming sober. And I know this is middle grade, and maybe some people think this is like propaganda, like Go Ask Alice, just to scare people into like the straight and narrow. But I believe this tells a lot of truth in a unique way, and I think the verse is like the last book. You know, it's definitely a more unique writing style, and the way the writing style is, I think adds so much to the story, because drugs is messy and it's not going to fit your ideal standard line of how things should be. And so I think the verse really adds to that, because it's not going to be your traditional story, but at the same time, it's not like an epic, like, you know, like with the Odyssey or nothing like that, or like traditional poems where it's going to rhyme and sound pretty. It is not these things. And I think that adds so much authenticity. It adds so much realness to this. So when I talk about Fallout, I'm going to be sad because Crank and Glass are so good, but I do recommend reading Fallout. But I do want to warn you, it is not as good as the other 2, but I still will talk about it here. And I think it is good to finish Christina Bree's story And, I've seen people online talk about how they don't like how much profanity is in Crank and Glass. But it's it's about a person addicted to meth. It's not, you're not going to have a happy, clean story, and I'm sorry if that's what you want. That is not the purpose of this. Honestly, this book isn't going to be for everybody, but honestly, if you're anything like me and you've had a parent or parents, family members, siblings, somebody close to you that's dealt with meth in particular, and you've watched their struggle. When I was a young teenager, those two books gave me what I needed at the time, and everybody needs different things. I know this, but if you're like me and you want to understand the mindset a little bit and the craziness of it in a safe way, I think these books are great for that. And even as I reread these as an adult, maybe I do have some bias towards it because it gave me so much of what I need. But I don't have so much bias towards Ellen Hopkins that I can't point out flaws. And there are some books with some heavier flaws, and I will get to those eventually. But I really think more YA books and more middle grade books, and I don't think middle grade books should be filled with like a bunch of sex, cursing, and drugs, but I think more books should cater to harder topics for kids and teenagers, because the real world is the real world, and this is a safer way to maybe understand things around. And I know everybody has to handle things differently, so I know this isn't for everybody, but if you're a parent, I would recommend you read this first, definitely, and then maybe judge. And I think if you can guide and just show how crazy things are, or like I said, somebody, maybe this can give you some perspective. I don't think this will make you sympathize necessarily, but sometimes understanding isn't about sympathizing. I know that's a ramble. When it comes to drug-related stuff, sometimes it's a little hard for me personally to get the conversation I'm having in my brain going back and forth and my feelings out. And so maybe cranking this one seems all over the place, and I apologize. This is a tougher subject for me to talk about, especially since it involves meth in particular and bad parenting. But if you can handle this, I would definitely recommend you read this, even as an adult. It's a unique read, and Ellen Hopkins, you can tell she's really good at putting herself in other people's shoes, and my heart goes out for her. While I don't have a kid myself, I know it's hard to watch people go through things, and the fact that she channeled all of that into 2 amazing books, I appreciate her for that. So guys, that is it. Next time I will talk about Fallout. As I mentioned, it is definitely the weaker book, but it definitely is the weaker book of the 3, but I do think it is good to finish it out, especially since these are relatively quick reads, despite the fact that this says like over 600 pages. Just because it's verse, it makes it quicker. So guys, I will see you later.